do whatever you have to do to get this baby here. It's almost Mother's Day, and my due date for my second child is actually on Mother's Day, which has had me thinking a lot about my journey as a mom. Now, the biggest question that I get is, why did I choose to have an out-of-hospital birth? It's not something you really hear too much about. In fact, I feel like the universe kind of called me into it. And so this is a really beautiful journey and experience that I am so happy to share my knowledge about. Ultimately, the reason why I decided to have an out-of-hospital birth is because growing up, I had a lot of traumatic experiences in the hospital, none of which were personal to me, but seeing my family be misdiagnosed, be products of malpractice, and ultimately losing my father to malpractice was something that let me know that I would not feel comfortable giving birth in the hospital setting. In fact, childbirth used to scare me. Like, the idea of having a child, being a Black woman in America, and knowing that the Black maternal health rate is at an all-time high, it made me feel uncomfortable about going into what should be a sacred and beautiful time, just knowing that I wouldn't have the support, right? So before I even got pregnant, I was thinking about all kinds of wild ways to give birth. I thought about going to Hawaii and diving into the ocean and giving birth like my ancestors did. I have thought about giving birth in the woods. I thought about what home birth would look like. And ultimately, I found out about birth centers and started learning about the journey of midwives. And it was truly one of the most transformative experiences of my life. Not only because I had a beautiful and safe and sacred and well cared for birth, but also because I found a community of people who are on this holistic and indigenous journey with me that make me feel seen, safe, and soothed. And so as I approach Mother's Day and as I approach my second birth, I am recapping on my birth story publicly for the very, very first time. Woo! To be honest, it makes me a little nervous. I was pregnant with a bunch of friends who did not go the birth route experience. And let me just make this disclaimer that all birth is natural birth, right? It is the most natural, most beautiful thing that a woman can do. Whether you have an epidural, a C-section, my belief is that all birth is natural birth. But for me, I knew that I wanted to have an unmedicated experience and that I wanted to have as little intervention as possible. And the reason why I wanted to do that was just to see who I am at this peak moment where women are literally at the veil of this spiritual experience. So that was really important to me, and that's what my birth plan or preference was. And so when I found Kindred Space, a Black women-owned midwifery and birthing center in South Los Angeles, I knew that that was the space that I wanted to go into. Now, convincing my husband was a little bit different. We had an intake call. He got to know the people. He got to really see kind of what the energy was of a birth center. And then ultimately he was on board after that. But the entire journey was such a different experience than going to an OBGYN. Now, for those of you who have had an experience as a mother and have found beautiful OBGYNs that you felt safe with and you felt cared for with, I'm so happy that that is your experience. But for me, it's not that I didn't feel safe or comfortable with my OB. It's just that it didn't feel personal. It didn't feel like I was meeting someone who was gonna be a part of my community or really care that much about my safety or my well-being or what I really ultimately wanted from this birthing experience. So that was something that I noticed immediately. The first thing that my husband will tell you is that they separated the families. Now, he and I kind of see this a little differently, but I totally understand where he's coming from as the father of my child and also as my husband. The very first experience that we had at the OB, they took me in the back to ask me if I felt safe in my relationship. I, as a woman, respect that because I know that not every woman has a safe and loving and nurturing experience. But on the other hand, I did bring my husband with me, and they did separate us, and it kind of felt a little bit like a separation of a family thing. It wasn't the only time that it happened. It happened every single time I came into the OB. So at a certain point, you would want your partner to be welcomed in if that's the type of relationship that you have. When we first met with Kindred Space, it automatically felt like this familial thing, We were hugged by the midwives. We were asked how we were doing, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. How is our nutrition? How is our partnership? How are we feeling about bringing this child into our home? These are questions that you can't really get to in a 10-minute session with an OB. So that experience alone made me feel so much more welcome and nurtured and cared for. I also think just being in the birth center and just having this kind of like home environment with a beautiful garden in the back that was flourishing, and being in a space where so many babies had been born in safety and in a nurturing and loving environment just really made you feel like, okay, I think that I'm going to be safe here, So my experience with Kindred Space was so incredible. And yeah, it made the birth experience that much more sacred. Now, my actual birth and my actual labor, a lot of it is a blur, to be honest. But I think the biggest thing that stands out to me about that experience was just how much I was cared for in that space and in that time through mental coaching, through spiritual coaching, through the nourishment of being held in that space by being physically given food and water and making sure that I am doing everything in my power to bring this baby forth safely. As a first-time mom, I would say that I had a very unique birthing experience. I started dilating very, very early on, to the point where I thought that I was going to have my child a lot earlier than he actually came. And so I was in prodromal labor for maybe 10 days, 5 centimeters dilated, walking around this world as if everything was normal. So I actually had to kind of jumpstart my labor by taking castor oil. Now, if you've ever taken castor oil, you know how disgusting it is. And so it immediately responded to my body in the form of a laxative, TMI. Probably. But it also jump-started my contractions and helped my water to break. So shortly after my water broke, my contractions started ramping up very, very quickly. And I think in less than an hour, I was on my way over to the birth center. I think this part of the story is hilarious because as soon as I started having contractions, my husband went into a deep cleaning mode. He started vacuuming, he started sweeping, he started cleaning the floors, he was cleaning the bathrooms, and he just kept saying, "We're bringing home a baby tonight. Like, the house needs to be clean." And I really loved that. That was such a cool moment. I kind of labored by myself for a while. I was sitting on a birth ball and kind of just swaying and rolling and just making myself as comfortable as I could be as the intensity of these contractions started ramping up. Now, the worst part of my experience was the car ride over there. And it's so funny because that was probably the shortest part of the experience. But just not having the opportunity to move and sway through contractions really made that car ride feel like so much. And my husband drives a Jeep, so it's bumpy, it's rocky, he's speeding, it's 1 a.m. He's like, "We gotta get there." And I'm like, "Slow down." So that was just like, a comical and uncomfortable part of the whole experience. But anyway, I get to the birth center. I'm 5 centimeters dilated still. And I feel like that time in between like me dilating was like probably the most intense part of the labor. I just remember being in the tub and my husband is like pouring water over my back and he's affirming me, and he's saying things like, you're so strong, you got this, like, just breathe. And I just remember thinking to myself,
like, I am never having a kid again.
Or I am definitely getting the epidural next time. But that part of the experience was also so short that after I gave birth, it kind of just like disappeared. Wild how that happens. I hear about birth amnesia all the time and just didn't realize that it actually would happen to me. So, so I'm in the bathtub. I'm just like kind of trying to find my peace in this space. And my husband is coaching me through it. He really became and stepped in as my doula because my doula was unavailable. For whatever reason, we couldn't get in contact with her. And so it was just me and Dom. And I feel like that was such a beautiful experience to bring our first child into the world. Now, this time around, I will have extra support. And I am looking forward to that, especially with the pain relief type things. But, you know, ultimately, that moment I feel like was so sacred for us to just bring our first seed in and just do it by ourselves. One thing I loved about the midwifery experience was like, they just kind of let us do us. They came in, they checked on me maybe every 30 minutes, but they really gave us the space to kind of process what was happening for our own experience. And that was really beautiful and very, very powerful. So anyway, I am now fully dilated. I've gotten to 9 centimeters, and with the midwives, they rotate. So the midwife that first was on site with me, she left. It's about, it had to be like 5 a.m. at this point. She left. She said she was gonna go get her kids ready for school, take them to school, and like come back, right? So she's like, don't anybody tell me what the gender of the baby is. I'll be back. And so when she got back, I was still in labor. I was still pushing. And so I was in that ring of fire for 3-4 hours with the baby's head very, very much crowning. And it's so interesting because one thing that I noticed about that experience was that I never associated what I was feeling with the word pain. It was pressure, it was intensity, but I never used the word pain throughout that experience. And I don't know if that's just like practice and mental fortitude, or the practice of trying to like keep my mind intact that I have practiced all these years through mantras and affirmation work, or if it was really just that I was coached to a certain point where those words didn't even cross my mind. The word pain didn't even cross my mind. And so pain wasn't the thing that I experienced. It was intensity. It was pressure. But I just remember an intense amount of pressure as I'm trying to push this baby forward and feeling like my contractions just weren't long enough to get the baby past. And so I'm exhausted at this point. I'm getting real tired because I've been pushing for almost 4 hours. You know, the dilation part was intense and it was the worst part of it all, but it also was not as frustrating or as exhausting as trying to push. And so I just remember getting real tired. Like, I was like, I don't know. Like, if these contractions don't get any longer, like, I don't know what's gonna happen. And so, you know, my midwives asked me to just rest for a little bit. So I laid in the bed and I felt still like pushing. And so my body was kind of naturally working to push and to like bring this baby earthside. And after 4 hours, my midwife, who had left me fully dilated, was like, you're still here? You're still pushing? What's going on? And she went in and she checked everything and she said, you have this like ridge that's not moving. And she was like, are you okay if we cut it? And I remember I didn't want any interventions, but at this point I was like, do whatever you have to do to get this baby here. And so she ended up cutting what we found out later was the hymnal ring, an intact hymnal ring. And as soon as that was cut, I think it was maybe 2 more pushes and the baby was here. And I just remember the baby's head was out and then the baby's shoulders were out. And then they asked me, do you want to pull your baby out? And so I pulled my baby out and held him on my chest, and it was the most rewarding thing ever. Now, I didn't know what the gender of the baby was, and so of course I like lifted him up and I was like, it's a boy, and then held him back to my chest. And it was such a sweet and tender moment because he didn't cry. He just was just observant, just super chill, and just stayed there for hours in that state of just like, I'm just here, I'm chill, I made it. Like, I made it earthside, I can relax now. And I just remember feeling this great sense of relief, you know, like, oh wow, like I did it. That was amazing. And then, like I said, that amnesia kicked in, and all of that talk about how I'm never having a baby again just went away. And so, you know, that was my birth story. It was beautiful. It was powerful. I think some of my takeaways from that experience were the practice that I use with mantras, the things that I say to myself on a regular basis, they continuously kept coming up. Through the exhaustion, I kept telling myself, my energy is infinite. My energy is infinite. I got this. I can pull from this well of understanding. My practice in meditation reminded me that even in the hard times, I could return to my breath. My husband also reminded me to return to my breath, which was very, very nice. Every time I was hyperventilating or breathing too fast, he'd be like, slow your breath down, babe. Just take a deep breath, like slow your breath down. And it gave me that space to rest in between those contractions. The other thing I just kept thinking was like, oh, I don't have enough to give. I don't have enough to give. And I remember reframing by saying, I am more than enough. I was so incredibly proud of myself for being able to have the birth experience that I wanted to have, not just because my body did it, but because my mind was able to do it. The one thing that I feel I don't agree with a lot of what people are saying is, oh, there's no reward for having an unmedicated birth. But I don't think that's true at all. I think there is so much reward to having an unmedicated birth. I think there's reward to having any kind of birth, right? But having an unmedicated birth requires you to be a different kind of present. It requires you to put yourself above the physical so that you can be in a state of spiritual. You know, it requires you to tap into the present moment in a different way. It requires you to be 100% still with your breath. And so I'm proud of who I've become because of my unmedicated birth, right? I'm proud of who I've become because of my choice to follow my intuition and to move in the unconventional path of an out-of-hospital birthing experience. And I'm excited about the community that I have met through the process. I feel like I meet so many other kindred space families, and I'm like, there's like this common unity amongst us, not just because of the birthing center or the birthing experience, but because of what we've learned along the way about how we can choose a different path. And so as I prepare to birth again at the birthing center, my second baby, I am really, really looking forward to recapping on this journey, to just remembering these moments. Recently, I had a conversation with one of my midwives, and she was like, your birth was one of the more empowering ones. She's like, it just reminded me that mindset is so important. She's like, I watched you change your mind over and over again to find your balance and to find your center. And to me, that was validation of the work that I've done as a musician, as an affirmation artist, and as somebody who supports people through their wellness journeys. And that was probably my biggest takeaway, is that this work that I do in real life, it really works in intense situations. So if I can do this work through what is considered one of the physically most challenging things a woman can do in this life, then I know that I could overcome any mental hurdle, because ain't no mental hurdle got shit on giving natural birth, okay? So yeah, anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this birthing story. And yeah, if you did, please share it with somebody. I think it's important for people to see positive representations of birth, especially in Black women. And so please share this with somebody who maybe is afraid of giving birth. Please share it with somebody who is pregnant. Please share it with somebody who you feel could really benefit from the encouragement that your mentality is going to get you through anything, okay? Alrighty, y'all. Thanks for listening. Have a beautiful and blessed day. Peace.